Okay, so we now continue to the next part in our excursion into React and using the W3 Schools tutorials. I've covered up to rendering HTML and using JSX. Let me go back to W3 Schools, specifically the React part. And also let me open up my CodePen so I can type some of the code. I'll create a new pen. I'm going to separate this window just so I have it on the other side, and I have the W3 Schools over here. Okay, so let's go to React Components. That's the next part. We're going to be going through this part of the tutorial in this video. We're going to do the components. Specifically, React components are like functions that return HTML elements. So far we know that this is what we want from React. We want to see HTML being created without necessarily using HTML at the same time while using HTML. So we're going to be making or actually putting out classes and functions. Classes and functions in React are very similar in that they're just basically little programs. They're independent and reusable bits of code. So they're little programs inside of a program that do things. They serve the same purpose as JavaScript functions, but work in isolation. There are going to be, and there are already, some functions built into JavaScript. These are functions and classes that we'll create ourselves. So in order to start creating a class component, you need to know that there's a naming convention. You have to call it a class, C-L-A-S-S, and whenever you call a class or create a class, it needs to start with a capital letter, and it basically represents just this little program, this function in there. There's other languages like Java that use classes, but these are going to be somewhat different, or a little bit different at least, than what you'll find in those other languages. Let's just stick to React for now. So here is how you create a class. You call out the class with the word class. You use this capital letter, this was called car, C-A-R, and you tell it to extend this React.component. There's a bracket, and then you'll tell it to render and return some HTML. In this case, this is one line of HTML. So let me slide down a little bit here so that I can see the example and tell it to run the example. And this is a very basic class. So if we go from the top, it imports the React and React DOM first, and then it declares this class by just using the word class, giving it a name, capital C-A-R, extends React.component. And this inside the bracket, the little program, the little class will say to render something, and that is returning some HTML, which is just an H2. I am a car. I'll go back to the CodePen window and create a new CodePen. Was already created, but I'll just give it a name, clicking on the pencil, and say this is going to be called the class function. That, and the HTML, give it a little bit of basic HTML. The very basic is going to be just saying, hey, this is an HTML page. So bracket HTML and then closing it. Inside of that, I'll open and close a body tag. Body. And then inside of this body tag, we can have our division that calls for the ID to be root. That division closes with no other content. Okay. There's no JavaScript yet. There's no CSS for these assignments, these exercises rather. I'm going to give myself a little bit more space just so I can see some things. And now I can start to type in the JavaScript that's in the sample. Well, first of all, they tell us to import React and React DOM. So let's do that, get out of the way. Go to the settings of the file the JavaScript settings, we can say the preprocessor needs to be Babel. And then search CDNs. I'll do a search for React first, and here's React. It's added. The second one, also React DOM. Save and close, and now our file should be ready to go with the React dependencies called. My JavaScript, as given in the sample, it calls for a class called car that extends React component and then renders and brings in some HTML. So I could either copy and paste or just start typing. And it's going to be uppercase car extends, and it's react.component space bracket, go to the next line. And here we tell it to render. It starts to draw some HTML. It's void, so it's open, close parentheses, another set of braces. And here we will tell it to return the HTML, return bracket h2, close the bracket, and our message is hi, I am a car, exclamation point, slash h2, we'll close the header 2, and a semicolon tells it that's the end of that line. To call this then, to actually show something on the screen, we need to give it the second part of the component, and that is the React DOM.render, open parentheses. We're going to call bracket capital C-A-R space slash space because it's a single element, and we close the bracket, comma to give it the next part, which is get, actually not get, document dot get element ID. Notice the use of uppercase here in camel case. So get is not capitalized, E is capitalized in element, I in ID is capitalized. Then the brackets, or rather the parentheses, open and close, saying it's void, and they shouldn't be because actually that's where root goes. That is apostrophe or quote, single quote, root. At the very end, we type in a semicolon, and that way it tells it this is the end of the code for now. Okay, and I'm not getting a result yet, so I may have misspelled or typed in something incorrectly. And oh, I have an error that says on cut, type error, document get element ID is not a function. And no, it's not a function because it should be get element by ID, which is capital B and then Y. And that was a problem. Hi, I'm a car is displayed on the right side. So we have our basic HTML on top. That's what's going to bring in everything else after it's plugged into the class. The class is car with a capital C that extends react.component, and then it renders our little message. The next sample, I'm going to close the one for the class, is going to be for a function. So what they told us in this text is that although classes and functions work very much the same way, except maybe that classes have a little bit more that's available to them, the rest of the courses that you take through W3 schools, they would say, to use classes above, instead of functions. So, but we'll still do this function anyway. And this function, or at least this sample, does the same thing. Instead of calling a class, though, they call it a function that's called car that returns the same message. And if you look at the way that it's constructed in the sample, it works a lot the same way, except that it's calling a function. So we already have our index page created. It's the same thing, instead though they do have a function called car. This would be for two separate files, but since we're working with one file, I'm going to then tell it that here, instead of showing me just this one division, I'm going to copy that and put it on the second line. paste that. And here, say, bring in a root 2 ID. Before I go any further, let me save this. So we have a root and a root 2. It's only displaying one because we have JavaScript here to cover that one root. But we do have code in the sample that shows us how to create a function. So I'm gonna take this the easy way, and rather than typing it, I'm just going to copy this function as well as the second element and paste it after the last semicolon in the JavaScript. Pressing Ctrl V to paste, and it disappears because now I have two things that are conflicting. At the bottom, what I mean by conflicting is I have this class called car, and then I'm trying to get a function that's also called car. So what should it do? It's looking for a root and a root 2. Well, let's start out by calling the function instead of just car, call it car2. And instead of saying hi, I'm also a car, let's say hello, I am also a car, just a little different. The React DOM is the same or very close to it, .render, and it's going to try to render a car2 function instead of the other one. And document get element by ID should be root 2 instead of just root. And then that way I have now created a class called car and a function called car2 that call two separate things. It says hello, I'm a car, and hello, I'm also a car. Notice though how we didn't have to sandwich these in with another division. Well, that's I guess it was unexpected. I thought that maybe I was going to get an error and I had to put in an extra function there or an extra division. I guess I still could, and not necessarily a division, but maybe an article like I did in the last assignment, and just say, hey, you know, here's an article that contains all these things. Hi, I'm also a car. Hello, I'm also a car. So this is class function. This is the part that I want to see. Get the CodePen URL and turn it in for a grade, and I'll see you in the next video.